I am trying to walk the line between them so as to create a bridge between them, leading hopefully and ultimately to the reconciliation of those both sides. I remember the first time I saw an Ole Miss football game. I'm sitting with my brother. We had just gotten done eating breakfast in our house in Birmingham on the old Jefferson Pilot Sports, and I remember thinking to myself, man, those jerseys are ugly. Like, I would never play football there. But it was around the time my brother and I started playing football out in the yard, and we loved playing football in the yard. And I just remember thinking, Ole Miss's jerseys were so ugly. So every time we played in the yard, it was the Dallas Cowboys and it was the San Francisco 49ers. He was Jerry Rice. I was Emmitt Smith. We had like lockers in our rooms of how much we loved those teams. And just kind of as we grew up, loving playing ball, got to high school, and realized that football was something that I really loved and started playing. Growing up, I was always too articulate, too well-spoken to hang out with my black friends. I was too smart. I made too good of grades. I was in the advanced programs. I was in gifted classes. So I was too smart. I was too educated to hang out with my black friends. But I was also too black to be included in the things with my white friends. And so all growing up, there was this tug of war between the culture of my skin and the culture of my natural aptitude for scholasticism. And so I've always had to hold those two things in tension, and they haven't always intersected or made sense to me. So from the time I was a kid, I realized pretty early on I didn't particularly enjoy playing football a ton. And so when I get in college, I realized very quickly, man, there's a lot of work that goes into this, and it's not always fun. But what it affords you is it affords you to be surrounded by people who just want to be around you, and that feels good. I think for me, what I found is I began to play more for my family than I did myself. So I began to play more for the pride of my family because when I would hear my parents, brag and boast about both their sons playing in college, or hear my sisters brag about their brothers playing college football, and hear my friends like, hey, this is my guy, and then you have a good game, and everybody's like, man, I went to high school with that guy, or I went to church with that guy. There's something about that where you end up playing for the approval of other people. My time at Ole Miss was a wonderful time where I was loved so well, embraced so much by white and black people alike. But it was also a time where my eyes began to be opened up to systemic oppression and its systemic injustices in a place that I love dearly. I've got this football world that I'm living in, which is predominantly African American, with men who I love, but yet at the same time I'm sitting in these classes and I love it. I'm eating it up, and all my study partners are white. All my study guide writers are white. All of the people that I'm spending time with in the classroom and outside of the classroom are white. And so there's a bit in which I fell prey to the Brown v. Board of Education doll test. And even though I would never consciously or willingly offer this, I think subconsciously at the beginning of my college career I thought this, that white is better. And it was not until college that I began to notice that, but also embrace and love my culture. And then my senior year, after playing SEC football for 3 years, at the end of it, I'm thinking to myself, I'm just going to go, get a job. I'm going to be a teacher. I maybe try my hand at ministry. I'm not really sure. But then I got invited to the National Combine. So I get there, I get to Baltimore, I'm grinding, I love it. And after the first couple days of practice, I'm thrown completely into the game, and it's great. But as time goes on, I realize that, man, there's something here that's just not quite right. And it wasn't until a September night in Atlanta, Georgia, that I realized what that was.
And give him a gain of 1, so 2nd and 5. And here's Beck trying to pick up a touchdown in the air. He gets it to the rookie running back, Jason Cook from Ole Miss. So one of Parade Jerry's.
So I run out, I catch this ball, and I dive in. And there's this really surreal point that you kind of mix. It's that moment where you can't tell if it's real life or it's a dream. It's kind of waking up or having a dream when you're partially awake, and it seems so real, but at the same time it seems like a dream. I'm sitting there with my helmet in my hands. Again, this really eerie, funny feeling came over me, and that was, is that it? The one moment that I was expecting to define me as a man, the one moment I was expecting to confirm me to be the moment where I thought I was truly going to be a success, the one moment that I was looking to essentially satisfy me, was so dissatisfactory, and it was so empty that I had this crazy, but at the time outrageous thought, which was, God, what if you've called me to something else? 2 days after that, I got cut by the Ravens, but I got calls from a ton of different NFL teams, and I said thanks, but no thanks. And that day, I walked away from the game of football and walked into the ministry that God had preordained for me from before time began. I received a phone call from the head coach at Ole Miss at the time, who wanted me to come back and be the football team chaplain. I had that conversation 2.5 weeks before the Atlanta game, and the Atlanta game happens, and I'm asking myself, where do I go from here? What do I do? And then I get cut. And it was a day that most people, it's the saddest, most depressing day of their life. But for me, I am super excited. I'm crunk. I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, finally I can do what I've been called to do. Finally I can do what I want to do. And the day I got cut, I called the FCA chaplain at the time, a guy named Todd Johnson. I said, hey, man, look, here's who I am. Here's a conversation I had with Coach. What do you got for me? That was on a Monday. On Wednesday morning, I was in Oxford, Mississippi, accepting a position as a football chaplain for the University of Mississippi football team. And I remember that day, it was incredible. I went to Oxford for a job interview and ended up having to stay to look at apartments and getting all my ducks in a row, because now I was in ministry as a chaplain for the football team at Ole Miss.
This young man that was getting his degree at Beeson at the time, named Jason Cook, and he just really seemed to fit the profile of who we were looking for and what we were trying to do.
I was approached by a couple guys who said, hey man, our pastor wants to talk to you. And I was like, okay, cool, that's great. I'm not interested. I have no interest in doing this, because at the time I didn't want to be the token black guy. I didn't want to be the novelty. I didn't want to be the exceptional Negro that some predominantly white church could sit up on a shelf and be proud of and marvel at without being respected and given the proper authority, without given the proper duties.
Now, the black and white relationship obviously has the most history. It obviously has the most layers of division. And so I think that's a difficult one to overcome. But yeah, it's not limited to that conversation, our pursuit of multi-ethnicism, and that's both at Iron City and at Valleydale.
They kept coming around, kept asking. I said, finally, I'll do it. And so the vision that lay before me as my wife and I are expecting our first child was, hey, would you come help us build a church downtown that is multi-ethnic, Christ-centered, and spirit-filled. In January of 2014, I came on staff to begin to plant what would become today Iron City Church.
And so we wanted to begin building that bridge in church culture, and not just black and white. And we don't just desire to be a bi-ethnic church.
What I see us becoming is continuing to grow as a multi-ethnic, Christ-centered, spirit-filled congregation in the city of Birmingham.
I think, sports gives us a really good picture of multi-ethnicism. I think most of us that have been athletes, that have played sports, you're involved in multi-ethnic, black-white relationships just because you're a part of the same team, you're focused on the same common vision, mission. And I think that's the exact paradigm that the New Testament lays out for us. Now in Christ, the dividing wall of hostility has been torn down. You don't have racial barriers as you once did, Jew and Greek, Gentile, but Christ is calling a people for himself from every tribe, tongue, language, and people.